My name is Claire Whitfield. When I was 9 years old, my father converted our garage into a bedroom for my brother because his old room, the one with the bay window and the ceiling fan, and the closet big enough to hang a full baseball uniform, was being turned into a trophy room. Not a playroom, not a guest room, a room for his trophies. And I was given the garage, the one with the cracked concrete floor and the smell of motor oil that never fully left, no matter how many candles my mother burned. She hung lace curtains over the only window and called it charming. My brother called it what it was. He said it the way only 12-year-olds can. With full confidence and zero cruelty, it's basically a storage unit, Claire. And everyone laughed, including my father. So I laughed too, because that was the only way I knew how to belong. That was 23 years ago. 2 weeks ago, I stood barefoot on the cedar deck of my house in the Hamptons, $18 million, paid in full, and I watched the Atlantic roll in like it had nowhere better to be. The air smelled like salt and wild roses, and the morning light came through the glass doors at an angle that made everything look like a painting. I had a cup of coffee in my hand. My phone was inside. There was no one else there. And for the first time in my life, not one single inch of the space around me belonged to anyone else. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how I got here. I grew up in Savannah, Georgia, in a house on Broughton Street with green shutters and a magnolia tree in the front yard that shed petals every spring like it was apologizing for something. My father worked in insurance. My mother taught piano lessons out of the living room on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. We were not poor. We were the particular kind of middle class that is always one emergency away from feeling it, and my parents handled that anxiety by concentrating all their hope into one place. My brother Marcus. He was the kind of boy who made adults lean forward when he entered a room broad shoulders by 14. A laugh that came easy. A baseball arm that the coach at Benedictine called once in a generation. My parents believed him. The whole city believed him. Our house ran on his schedule, his practice times, his travel tournaments. My mother kept a calendar on the refrigerator with his games color-coded in blue. I used to stand at the refrigerator for a long time, looking for my name anywhere on that calendar. It wasn't there. I wasn't jealous. I want to be clear about that. I was just always slightly confused about what I was supposed to do with myself in a house where every conversation eventually circled back to him, so I found chemistry. Not because someone handed it to me, but because I found a library book when I was 11, one of those old ones with the cardboard cover and the smell of 30 years of other people's hands about how soap is made. That simple. How fats and alkalis combine to create something that cleans. I made my first batch in the kitchen on a Saturday afternoon when everyone else was at an away game. I burned my wrist a little and it didn't matter at all because something I had made with my own hands actually worked. My mother came home and said the kitchen smelled like a candle store. She did not ask what I had done. She set down her bag and started reheating leftovers. I got straight A's through high school. Not because I was trying to compete with anyone, there was nothing to compete with. My brother barely maintained a C average, and no one mentioned it because baseball, but because the learning was the only thing that was unambiguously mine. No one could take credit for it. No one could decide it wasn't worth celebrating and be right about it. When my acceptance to NYU came through early decision, full academic scholarship, biochemistry, I waited until after dinner to mention it. My father said New York. That's expensive. I said the scholarship covers everything. He nodded and said, well, your brother's got the regional showcase next month, and that was the entirety of the conversation. I'm not telling you this to make you angry on my behalf. I'm telling you because it explains a thing about me that took years to understand. I learned very early how to build in silence, how to work without an audience, how to need nothing from the room around me in order to keep going. It looked like strength from the outside. On the inside, it was something lonelier than that. But it was also, eventually, the exact thing that saved me. New York in September feels like the whole world agreeing on something. I arrived with 2 suitcases and an address in Queens, and I stood on the subway platform the first morning and thought, nobody here knows Marcus Whitfield. Nobody here knows what my ceiling was supposed to be. The thought was so clean it made me dizzy. I studied hard and I worked hard and I kept making things. Formulations, now serums, emulsions, actives. The chemistry of skin is endlessly interesting to me because it is both personal and universal. Everyone has skin. Everyone wants to be taken care of. I worked at a lab on the Upper West Side during my junior year, and the head formulator, an older woman named Dr. Reyes, who wore red nail polish and tolerated no nonsense, told me I had an unusual ability to intuit how ingredients would interact before I'd even tested them. She said it the way you say something true matter-of-factly, without performance. I held on to that sentence for years. After graduation, I worked for a small cosmetics company in Brooklyn, good people, unremarkable products, and spent my nights in my apartment developing my own formulations, not to sell, not yet, just to get it right. I filled notebooks with ratios and pH levels and skin type variations. I ran trials on willing friends and paid attention to every note of feedback. I was 26 years old and I still called home every Sunday out of habit. My mother would tell me how the piano students were progressing and then tell me what Marcus was doing. He was trying out for a minor league team in the Carolinas. Then he had an elbow injury. Then he was doing personal training at a gym in Savannah. Then he was going to open his own gym. Then he was pivoting to life coaching. She said these things with the same warmth she'd always carried when talking about him. This bottomless confidence that whatever he touched would eventually become gold. I would listen and say, "That sounds great, Mom," and after we hung up, I would go back to my notebooks and my formulations and my very small, very serious life. I met a woman named Dev through a mutual friend in 2018. She was a brand consultant, sharp, funny, the kind of person who sees the shape of a thing before most people know it exists. She looked at my products, really looked at them, ran them on her own skin for 3 weeks, and then sat across from me at a coffee shop in Park Slope and said, "These are better than anything I've seen in their category, and you've been keeping them in your bathroom drawer for 2 years. Why?" I said I wasn't sure they were ready. She said, "They're ready. You're not. There's a difference." We started the company Meridian Skin 6 months later out of my apartment. I kept my day job for the first year while we built out inventory, filed patents on 3 formulations, and sold direct-to-consumer through a website Dev's college roommate built for us on a weekend. We were careful and deliberate, and almost aggressively uninterested in being flashy. No celebrity partnerships, no influencer launches, just the products and the science behind them, explained clearly and honestly to people who were tired of being sold fantasy. It worked slowly, then steadily, then in a way that stopped feeling slow. I didn't tell my family. This isn't as strange as it sounds. I want you to understand that it wasn't malicious. It wasn't strategy. It was simply that I had spent so many years bringing my accomplishments home and watching them disappear into the noise of my brother's story that somewhere along the way, I had stopped bothering. It felt like showing someone a painting they'd look past to check their phone. After a while, you stop holding up the painting. The first time our quarterly revenue crossed 7 figures, I was standing in the bathroom of our shared office space in Midtown, and I gripped the edge of the sink and breathed through my nose for 30 seconds, and then I washed my hands and went back to the meeting. I texted Dev one word, 7. She sent back 3 exclamation marks and a small green flame. That was our celebration. The year I turned 31, 2 things happened that I did not anticipate. The first was that a private equity firm approached us about acquisition, not a small offer, the kind of number that appears in documents and makes your lawyer say, "Take a moment before continuing." We had been approached twice before and declined both times. This time was different. Their terms were structured in a way that would preserve our formulation patents, keep our team intact, and allow Dev and I to exit cleanly with our names off the public announcement. That last part was intentional on my end. I had no interest in a press tour. I had no interest in my face being attached to anything that would eventually make its way back to Savannah. We signed in February. I bought the house in the Hamptons that same week, something I had been looking at for 8 months, quietly, during lunch breaks. The way you look at a thing you're not sure you're allowed to want. The deed came through on a Tuesday. I drove out there alone on a Wednesday morning, let myself in through the front door, walked through every room, and sat down in the middle of the kitchen floor and said nothing for a long time. The second thing that happened that year was my brother's engagement. His name was Derek. Now he had started going by Derek professionally because he said Marcus sounded like someone who worked with his hands, and I did not say anything when my mother relayed this. His fiancée was a woman named Britt who had a lifestyle page with a meaningful following and a talent for making everything look sun-drenched and effortless. They were engaged in the Bahamas and the photo was beautiful. My mother called me the same afternoon, still crying happy tears, and said, "You have to come home for the party, Claire. This is family." I went. I want to be honest about that too. I went because some part of me still believed in the word family, the way you believe in a house you grew up in. It isn't rational. It just lives in you. The party was at my parents' house on a Saturday evening in April. My mother had rented a white tent for the backyard and strung lights through the magnolia tree, and the whole thing looked genuinely beautiful in the way that Savannah always manages to look beautiful, even when you're not sure it deserves to. I drove down from New York, and I brought a bottle of champagne I'd been saving, and a set of linen placemats for their new apartment because Britt had mentioned once in a comment that she was drawn to natural textures. I stood at the edge of the backyard and watched my brother work the room. He had gained some weight but carried it well, and he laughed easily, and everyone loved him the way everyone had always loved him. My mother kept touching his arm. My father kept refilling his glass. I talked to cousins and neighbors and my Aunt Lorraine, who hadn't changed in 15 years except for her hair color. I talked to Britt's family, who were lovely and warm and asked me genuine questions about my life in New York. I said I worked in skincare. I said it was going well. At dinner, my father made a toast long, emotional, the kind of speech that takes its time. He talked about the year Marcus was scouted out of high school. He talked about the regional showcase. He talked about the injury and the comeback and the reinvention, and the word resilient appeared 4 times. He said, "This is what this family is made of." He raised his glass. Everyone drank. He did not mention me. I was sitting 6 feet away from him. My mother spoke next. She cried beautifully, as she always had. She talked about the day Marcus was born, the day she knew this family had something special. She talked about Britt like she had always known her, like she had been waiting for exactly this kind of daughter. Then she looked down the table and found me and said, "And Claire's here too, all the way from New York," with the same warmth she used when acknowledging a guest who had come a long way and really hadn't needed to. I smiled. I lifted my glass slightly. Then my brother stood, and he was halfway through thanking people when he turned to where I was sitting and said, "Speaking of New York, my sister is here. She's been up there for years, doing her little thing with Lotions or whatever it is." And a few people laughed because the way he said it was funny. The way he said everything was funny. He looked right at me. Still trying to make it, right, Claire? Still figuring it out? The table was quiet for exactly 1 second. I said nothing. I did not look away from him. He shrugged this easy, dismissive lift of one shoulder and moved on to his next thank you. My father chuckled. My mother was already looking somewhere else. I folded my napkin very carefully and set it on the table beside my plate. I finished the champagne in my glass. I said goodbye to Britt's mother, who was the kindest person at the table and deserved a proper farewell. I found my coat on the rack by the door, and then I walked out to my rental car parked at the curb under the oak trees, and I sat there for a moment with my hands in my lap, not shaking, not crying, just very still the way you are when something finally confirms what you already knew, and you are surprised to feel more clear than hurt. I booked a flight from Savannah to New York for 6 the next morning. I left the champagne I had brought with my parents because they would enjoy it, and because I no longer wanted anything I had brought into that house to stay inside me. The drive to the airport in the early dark was quiet. The Spanish moss hung from the trees along the highway, gray and weightless. I rolled the window down and let the warm air in and thought, I am not going back for a long time. I landed at JFK at 8:15. The driver who picked me up knew me by name and asked how my trip was. I said short. He nodded and put on something quiet, and we drove through the April morning into the city, and I looked at the skyline the way I always did, like a reminder that I had chosen this, that every single day in this city had been a choice I made for myself. 2 days later, I drove out to the Hamptons. The house sat at the end of a private road that curved through beach grass and old oak trees. 3 bedrooms, cedar shingles gone silver from salt air. Floor-to-ceiling windows that faced the water, a deck that stretched the full length of the back and had a gap in the railing where someone had planned to add a gate and never gotten around to it. I liked that gap. It felt honest, I stood on the deck that first morning with my coffee and I thought about my brother saying still trying to make it, and I did not feel anger exactly. It was more like recognition, the recognition of someone who has been told for so long that they are small that they almost started to believe it, and now stands in front of evidence to the contrary and has to decide what to do with that. What I decided to do was nothing. I walked back inside, refilled my coffee, and sat down at the kitchen table to review the final documents from the acquisition. I did not think about my family for most of that summer. I was starting something new, a consulting practice, building it slowly, carefully, taking on 2 clients to start and no more. Dev had moved to London for a year, and we talked every Sunday in the mornings, and those conversations were the best part of my week. I got to know my neighbors, a retired couple from Boston, and a young family from Philadelphia who had a dog that kept wandering into my yard and did not appear to be sorry about it. I learned to cook fish properly. I read 7 novels in 6 weeks. In September, my mother called. She said, "How are you?" She said, "We miss you." She talked for a while about the summer, about the garden, about my father's back, and the new medication, and the way he refused to take it consistently. Then she said, "You know Marcus and Britt are having a hard time." She said it the way she had always said things about my brother, carefully, with the underlying assumption that whatever came next was something I would want to help with. I waited. She said that Marcus had launched a business coaching program online. She called it a program. Very official sounding, and it had not gone the way he planned. She said some of the people who had paid for it were upset. She used the word situation. I had read about it already, actually. He had promoted the program with testimonials that were not attributed to real clients, and when a few people dug into it and posted their findings, the whole thing had unraveled quickly in the specific, merciless way that social media unravels things. The phrase life coaching scam had appeared in several comment threads. His page had lost several thousand followers in 1 week. He needed, my mother said, some guidance. Someone who understood business. "You mean me?" I said. "You're his sister," she said. I listened to the birds outside the window. A gull was sitting on the deck railing, looking directly into the house with total confidence. "Mom," I said. "He told a room full of people that I made lotions for a living. He's been introducing me as the one who's still figuring it out for as long as I can remember. He has never once asked me what I actually do." She said, "He's family, Claire. He didn't mean anything by it." I said, "I know he didn't. That's the part that matters." She was quiet. I said, "I love you. I'll call you Sunday." And I meant it, and I hung up, and I did not cry. I had been done with that particular kind of crying for a long time. I want to tell you about the phone call from my father because it was the one that surprised me. He called on a Tuesday evening, not Sunday. He was not a man who called outside of expected windows. His voice had the careful quality of someone working up to something, and I recognized it because I had never been on the receiving end of it before. That careful quality was usually reserved for conversations about Marcus. He said, "I want to say something." I waited. He said, "I saw an article about a company called Meridian Skin." He paused. "The acquisition, and some of the names involved." I said, "Okay." He said, "Dev Chen is listed as co-founder, and then there's a patent filing, under C. Whitfield." I said, "Yes." He was quiet for a long time. Not uncomfortable, quiet thinking, quiet. The kind he used to have when he was doing paperwork at the kitchen table on Sunday mornings when I was small, and the house was still, and the only sound was his pen. He said, "I owe you an apology." And then he stopped, and I could hear him trying to find the next part, trying to locate it in himself. And I waited because I had learned how to wait. He said, "I'm not sure I know how to do this right." I said, "I know. You don't have to do it perfectly." He said, "That night at Marcus's party, what I said in the toast, I know you were there. I know I." He stopped again. "I don't have a good reason." I sat down on the edge of the deck steps, my feet in the beach grass, the sun going low over the water. I didn't fill the silence for him. Some silences are the other person's to cross. He said, "I'm proud of you." I should have said it a long time ago. I said, "Thank you, Dad." We talked for another 20 minutes about ordinary things, the garden, a trip he and my mother were considering, a book he was reading. Normal things. Things that did not require repair. When we hung up, I sat there in the grass for a long time and watched the sky go from pink to purple to that deep, undecided blue before full dark comes in. I did not feel the explosion of emotion I might have expected from a conversation like that. I felt something quieter, more like a window cracking open after years of being sealed shut, not repaired, not resolved, just open. My brother reached out in October. The message came through LinkedIn, which told me something he did not have my email, had perhaps never thought to ask for it. The subject line said, "Reconnecting." The message was 3 paragraphs of careful language, the kind that has clearly been drafted and revised. He said he had been doing a lot of reflection. He said he knew he had not always been the best brother. He said he was working on a new direction and was reaching out to strong women in the business space for perspective. He did not reference the party. He did not reference 23 years of consistent dismissal. He attached a deck. It was a pitch deck, a new wellness concept, monthly subscription, digital coaching, plus physical product. The branding was actually not terrible. He'd worked with someone, but the market positioning was wrong, and the unit economics didn't hold, and the customer acquisition strategy was built on assumptions that had not been tested. I read it 3 times. I thought about what I might have said to anyone else who had sent me this deck, a stranger, a potential client, a person I had no history with. I wrote back. 1 paragraph. I said, "The core concept is interesting, but the economics won't hold at that price point with those acquisition costs. Your margin is thinner than it looks. Remodel the subscription tier and rethink your retention strategy before you pitch anyone else." I signed my name. I did not say anything else. He replied an hour later. "Wait, is this Claire?" I replied, "Yes." He replied, "I didn't know this was your account," which told me everything. He had reached out to see Whitfield, founder, Meridian Skin. He had not known, even then, that it was me. I closed the laptop and went to make dinner. December came and I drove down to Savannah for 4 days, the first time in almost 8 months. My mother had decorated the house with the same ornaments from my entire childhood. The ones kept in a shoebox in the hall closet wrapped in tissue paper, and the tree was too big for the corner it always went in, just like always. The piano had been moved to make room for a new couch. My father's reading chair was in the same spot by the window it had been in since I was 7. My brother was there with Britt, who was warm and self-aware in a way that I appreciated. She found me in the kitchen on the second morning when no one else was awake, and we drank coffee together, and she said, without preamble, "He told me what happened at the party, the toast thing and what he said at dinner." She set her mug down. I was embarrassed. "I want you to know that." I said, "Thank you." She said, "He's trying. He's slow at it, but he's trying." I said, "I know." And I did know. I could see it in the way he moved around me. Careful now, a little uncertain, watching for my reaction, the way people do when they realize they've been miscalculating someone for years and aren't sure how to correct the arithmetic. At dinner on the 3rd night, my father made a toast. A shorter one this time. He said he was grateful to have us all together. And he looked at me when he said it, held my eyes for a moment in the way people do when they want you to know the words include you specifically. My mother reached across the table and put her hand briefly over mine. It was not a transformation. It was not the dramatic scene where someone falls to their knees and says every true thing they should have said 20 years ago. It was just a small gesture in a warm room at the end of a hard year, and I knew better than to ask it to be more than that. After dinner, I helped with the dishes, and then I put on my coat and walked out to the backyard, past the magnolia tree that shed petals in spring, past the spot where the white tent had been in April, down to the edge of the grass where the old fence ran along the back property line. It was cold for Savannah, properly cold, and the night was very clear. I stood there for a while with my hands in my pockets and looked up at whatever stars made it through the city light. I thought about the garage, the cracked concrete and the lace curtains and the smell of motor oil that never fully left. I thought about the refrigerator calendar with no space for my name. I thought about my brother's voice at the party dinner still trying to make it right. Claire and the way a table full of people who were supposed to know me best had laughed without thinking about it. And then I thought about the house in the Hamptons. The cedar deck and the salt air and the Atlantic rolling in at whatever pace it chose. The gull on the railing who looked directly into the window and did not apologize for being there. The kitchen table where I read acquisition documents and ate breakfast alone and did not have to explain myself to anyone. I had not won something. I want to be clear about that. I had not beaten my brother or proven anything to my parents. The life I had built was not a rebuttal. It was just a life, the one I had always been building, quietly, in the rooms no one paid attention to, with the particular focused energy of someone who had long since stopped waiting to be seen before they began. If you had asked me 10 years ago what I wanted, I would have said I wanted them to notice, to show up to something, to say my name like it meant the same thing as his. Standing in that backyard in December, I realized I had stopped wanting that so gradually I hadn't noticed it leaving. What I wanted now was simpler. I wanted the morning light on the Hamptons water. I wanted a problem worth solving. I wanted the conversation with Dev on Sunday morning. I wanted to keep building things, quietly, seriously, in the way I had always known how to do. I turned around and walked back inside. My mother was setting out the dessert plates. My father was laughing at something my brother said. Britt was helping without being asked. I picked up a plate and started drying it, and the kitchen was warm, and the radio was on low, and outside the magnolia tree was dark and leafless in the December cold, waiting for spring like it always did. I was not angry. I was not performing peace, either. I was just there, present in a house that had never quite fit me, with people who were doing the best they could with what they understood about love, which was incomplete but also real. Both things at once. That's the part they never tell you about this kind of story. The ending isn't clean, it's just yours, and mine was enough. If you have ever built something in a room where no one thought to look, a business, a life, a version of yourself that no one in your family would recognize, I want to hear from you. Drop it in the comments. You don't have to explain the whole thing. Just tell me what you built. Sometimes that's enough.